Let's talk about Robert Bloch. Robert Bloch, 1917 to 1994, extremely prolific author during the course of a very long career. He got started very, very young in the professional market. Over the course of his life, Bloch authored at least 30-odd novels. Part of the problem putting a definitive number on how many novels Bloch actually wrote is the fact that he did use a variety of pseudonyms throughout his career. Also, in terms of a number of his younger contemporaries who were his close friends and associates, there's some critical debate as to how much, particularly of their first novels, were either Bloch effectively co-authoring or significantly rewriting the work, or were in fact Bloch's pieces which they rewrote and were permitted to put their names on. Again, that remains to be seen. We do, however, know that over the course of his career he wrote literally hundreds of short stories under his own name and under his known pseudonyms. Many of these were quite well received. He won a Hugo Award for a short story which he published fairly early in his career, a Bram Stoker Award twice, once for his writing and once for Lifetime Achievement, World Fantasy Authors Association. He was president of the Mystery Writers of America, Screenwriters Guild, and involved in a little bit of everything over the course of his extraordinarily long career. While horror was his first and truest love, he also worked in a variety of other genres. Science fiction was also near and dear to his heart, particularly after the 1950s. He also worked in true crime, both historic pieces and some fictionalized accounts, wrote a score of essays, a plethora of criticisms, both literary and other, some of which appeared in the pulps, some of which appeared in more mainstream and even academic venues. He also wrote a variety of screenplays over the course of his life, for film and television, and was likely involved in the writing of a number of others, again, because of his use of various pseudonyms and because of his penchant for ghostwriting. It's difficult to say how much. A prime example of this is the fact that we know he was associated with some of the writers for the original Star Trek series. We also know, based from his pseudonyms, he was involved in the writing of at least 3 episodes of the original series. Pardon. A number of critics would suggest that he was actually involved in writing several more. However, because of the ghostwriting, and because of the pseudonyms, and because of his skill as an editor and revisionist, it's difficult to say. So, his career got started exceptionally early. He was actually the youngest member of the Lovecraft Circle. He was at least 2 years younger than Henry Kuttner, several years younger than their next nearest contemporary, which gave him a bit of a kid brother position within the group. He actually made his first professional sale, 2 Weird Tales, at the age of 17. And we are not reading that story. However, we are reading The Shambler from the Stars, which was published very shortly thereafter. So, we're seeing Bloch at the very beginnings of his professional career. We're seeing his developmental stages. From The Shambler from the Stars, you can see the kind of talent and wordsmithing which led Lovecraft to declare that he had found in Bloch a rare and most natural talent, and he praised him very highly for his skill at such a young age, and said that he would only become a more relevant, I believe is the word Lovecraft used, writer as he was allowed to hone his skills. Lovecraft was particularly fond of Bloch. Again, he thought of him a bit as a kid brother. And the relationship between the two, starting at a very young, or very young for Bloch age, is reflected in The Shambler from the Stars, in which one of the major characters is very clearly based on HBL. There's based on the physical descriptions, the address, the demeanor. There's no doubt that he is casting his friend in this particular piece. However, Bloch has absolutely no reservations about killing off the Lovecraft character. Lovecraft almost immediately repays the favor in The Haunter in the Dark, which is why that piece is on the recommended reading list for this week. And his very thinly veiled Robert Bloch character also suffers a rather horrible demise. Bloch, however, got the last word in The Shadow from the Steeple, which is on the recommended list but is not required for this week. So, now that we've established Bloch's position within pulp and as a writer in general, looking specifically at the two pieces assigned for this week. The Shambler from the Stars is straight pulp. There's no two ways around it. It is in the classical Lovecraftian Yog-Sothian milieu, the creature accidentally summoned by the use of dread books from beyond the stars, which consumes those who summon it and spawns madness. The other one, Notebook Found in a Deserted House, is almost 20 years later, and it shows a different side of Bloch's character, a different side of him as author. While it maintains a lot of the core elements of Bloch's earlier horror fiction, we see a maturation, we see a shift away from the immediate drive, set piece, which seems to be such a major part of his structure in The Shambler from the Stars. The pacing feels much more naturalistic, it feels much more awkward. He's much more in tune in some ways with language, bearing in mind the narrator of the Notebook is a 12-year-old semi-literate boy. But he also still ties it back to a number of Lovecraftian locales and themes. So both pieces are very tightly woven into the mythos, broadly speaking. They both have an established place within it. Something that we need to talk about, particularly in terms of Bloch and some of the others, is the creation of these dread books, the creation of these mythological tomes. Now, Bloch in The Shambler makes good use of this, and the fact that he has to take it and have it translated, recognizing the limitations of the protagonist in terms of language, is rather important. All too often in these kinds of stories we see protagonists who have a bizarre proficiency for languages, or languages which very few people on Earth would read or speak, and yet somehow they have this capacity. In some cases, as we'll see later in this term, that's done well. In others, it's just like, okay, why does this character read Aramaic? But that's something we should always keep an eye out for, because the books themselves become almost portable within the Lovecraft circle. We see other writers referencing these dread tomes created by their friends. Prynne's The Mysteries of the Worm is particularly interesting in that it finds its way into a number of later stories, including Stephen King's Jerusalem's Lot, which we're going to be reading at the end of the term. So this is still very much with us, and we can't forget about the Necronomicon, one of the most popular books in the Lovecraftian materials, which has also made its way into various facets of our modern pop culture. But more on that later. So, we're seeing the development of Robert Bloch as pulp author. We're seeing his development over time from this cocky kid who makes his first sale at 17 into a more mature writer. For those of you who are interested, they're beyond Psycho, which is Bloch's best-known piece, although, personal opinion, the sequels to that are actually quite good. And Bloch's first two sequels, in particular, are really good. So, but he continues to develop. He's not afraid to grow. He maintains his hold on pulp horror throughout his career, but it develops, it shifts, it develops nuances. Those of you who are interested, Strange Eons, which was a much later novel by Bloch, I think that one was written in the 70s, is a full-length treatment of these Lovecraftian themes, which he, at that point, had been developing for 60 years. So, some things to think about, some additional readings which might be of interest. And next up, I believe, is Henry Kuttner.